Welcome everyone to our Tech in 20 series. We're excited today to have Paul Levesque talking with us about SSL and what it means, how it works, and what the future is of this type of technology. And so as we go through this, be thinking of questions that you'd like to ask. We'll have a question and answer at the end. As you can see, we have live polling going on out at pollev.com/tech20, and so feel free to go and answer those polls as we go through. It really helps to get an idea of what people are thinking and so on. And at this point in time, we'll turn the time over to Paul and go ahead and help us understand SSL a little bit more.
Great. Thank you, Clayton. Again, my name is Paul Levesque, and a couple of things. The poll that you see here that talks about how many sites use SSL, I kind of thought about how many things that use SSL in our everyday life. You kind of look beyond that because you assume right away that, again, you're secure. In an internet-facing world and in a mobile world, we've all, gotten, I guess, past the idea that security is already there. And this is really kind of what we're going into under the SSL functionality, is to kind of talk about how many things in our everyday life utilize SSL, and we don't even realize it. Everyone is doing online mobile banking and buying things online and doing things like that. And there's always the idea that SSL is required, obviously, to enable some security behind the scenes to ensure that either your credentials or your credit card information, your purchasing information, or things like that are being secured in some fashion. So again, thinking about SSL from that perspective is, again, there's so many things out there that we're utilizing SSL in our lives that are going to happen all the time. So that's kind of where our discussion is going to be headed today. So I guess let's move to the first slide here. So again, secure sockets, SSL, secure sockets layer. Again, what we're talking about here is, SSL encrypts the segments of network connections at the application layer for the transport layer. So again, it's kind of an interesting way to look at it. Is you're doing something to secure the transport of the data between one source and the other, but you're actually doing it at the application layer. And again, SSL uses asymmetric cryptography. For early in the morning, that's difficult. For key exchange, symmetric encryption for confidentiality, and it brings in something called message authentication codes for message integrity. So there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes. And when you start talking about SSL and secure socket layer, understand that there's also another name that it goes by, which is TLS. Overall, they're just cryptographic protocols that are used to provide security over the internet, right? So again, it's ensuring that you're allowing for secure connections between one device and the other. And in this case, you're seeing some of the headlines that are there. There's a ton of headlines every day regarding SSL failures, SSL vulnerabilities. All of these things are happening on a regular basis. We're hearing about them every day. But, one of the things to note here is analysts. Analysts always have an opinion, and the luminaries that are out there talk about, what's going on, what are we doing with regards to SSL. Analysts report that the #1 vulnerability and security risk with SSL is, in fact, errors in its actual implementation on the sites in which they're employed. So people doing the actual SSL process incorrectly, utilizing wrong keys, or utilizing the wrong level of keys, or not accepting the correct information. So again, it really comes down to a lot of the problems that are currently related to SSL have to do with improper implementation of the actual protocol itself. So understanding that a little bit more, sure.
Would that be like what these decode failures are that we see? Is that what we're talking about? Decode failures?
Exactly. Okay. In other words, the inability for them to decode the actual challenge in Handshake going back and forth, the inability to actually complete the Handshake process in SSL and establishing that connection. People are seeing huge amounts of that data, and thank you for bringing that up, because this is a very important point. This is where problems exist, and this is where our data is starting to become very valuable to us as a company, to be able to come back and say, hey, wait a minute, we're taking an analyst look at what's going on in a particular customer's environment and realizing very quickly that it has to do with decode failures, it has to do with poor implementation on behalf of those folks who are actually putting that information into play, and understanding that, again, all of these things are causing problems for the customer. Our customers don't realize, and for their end customers, quite honestly, but they don't realize that, again, little things like that, decode failures, issues where I can't complete the entire Handshake process with a particular device, is in fact causing all kinds of problems across people's networks, slowdowns, and having to retry multiple times, going through that, because again, these standard processes built into how SSL works. So again, in my words, what is SSL? It's a necessary tool for securing connections, utilized in nearly everything we do in a social or internet-facing world. It's a known commodity. It's something we all have to bow to at this point. For example, I assume everyone is occasionally logging into our corporate SSL VPN. And everybody thinks, well, it's just a VPN, I'm logging in. Well, there you go. We're utilizing SSL every day, logging into our corporate VPN environment, utilizing that secure socket layer and exchange going back and forth for that to allow that connection to happen. All right. So I guess probably the best place to start is to look into what the Handshake looks like. This is a very low-level explanation of what we're talking about with regards to an SSL handshake in general. Again, the client requests an HTTPS, S meaning secure, that's the difference. Requesting that type of session, server sends back a certificate, client receives the public key information, again, checks the server certificate against CA, and that doesn't mean us CA, that means against the certificate authority store that's on the client itself. And that's where a lot of problems are starting to exist. A lot of people are tripping over this particular issue because, again, they may be creating private certificates that they're issuing this from, and it doesn't chain up to a public cert that may be in random devices that are out there. So again, they look in their CA store and they go, okay, this is signed by, my company 123, and you look in there and say, well, it doesn't chain up to any of the certs I have in here. So I'm assuming that that CA or that certificate may not necessarily be valid because it doesn't chain up to anything I understand. So again, this is where a lot of the problems begin to break down, and ensuring that you're going through it. I think back to 10 years ago, and I remember working for a PKI company at the time. And one of the things that I tell people is, I remember selling PKI when PKI was not cool. PKI was something that you got thrown out of companies for even discussing with them and saying, we're going to do PKI, we're going to use certificates around for all of your authentication needs, and we're going to replace those 80 passwords, and we're going to go down this road, and everybody was like, get out. And quite honestly, this is where the problems began to exist. So again, thinking about it from the client side, that's where a lot of the problems exist. And then going back to, making sure that you have a key that you can send back to the server, encrypting that session, utilizing the client server side key exchange, making sure that you now have that information set into play. Again, if we think back, SSL was originally developed by the folks at Netscape and Netscape Communications, and that was back in 1996. So this has been in play forever and a day, right? You think about it, you start to utilize these kinds of things. SSL 2.0 has been in place for a really long time. It's now kind of morphed into something called TLS, which is another IETF spec with regards to utilizing the same kind of technologies. But what they've been doing over the few years that this has been in use and people are using it on a more regular basis is that they're offering increased encryption algorithm strengths, you know, supporting new types of algorithms and symmetric key stores, things like that to make that there. But what I think they're really starting to focus more on now is ensuring that, again, that ubiquitous exchange between servers and clients, and ensuring that that kind of connection is going to be available and is going to work for them. But they're also moving into putting in even higher levels of security. SHA-256, AES encryption has now become a standard in some of those environments. So again, starting to make that channel a little bit more secure. And one of the things that, you know, I found this quote, and it was really hard. They say find quotations with regards to you know, your particular topic, and SSL is a really hard thing to kind of find somebody who's willing to come out and say something quote-wise. But I found something that was kind of a little bit more adaptable to that. So the quote you see here in the box: adapt what is useful, reject what is useless, and adapt what is specifically your own. And that's really an important thing to think about, right? And that's what SSL has been. It started out as sort of being this thing that we're going to put out there and we're going to secure the channels, and everybody kind of laughed at it a little bit. And now you're starting to realize that it's become something that we use every single day in all of our secure transactions. And that kind of leads us up to today, right? Today we're at the point where we're using it. It's ubiquitous. It's across the board. Everyone is using it for all of their different applications to secure that channel. But now, you know, I'm going to kind of move to the next slide and start to say, okay, so what's next? What is the future of SSL? You know, what are the kinds of things that SSL is dealing with today as opposed to some of the things that we're dealing with in the last 10 years? So, you know, SSL, you know, a lot of folks are talking specifically, you know, eliminating the need for SSL, you know, that future is going away because they believe, and there's a lot of luminaries out there that I've heard speak about this, you know, what about IPv6? Is IPv6 going to be the next thing? Is that going to cure all the ills of SSL? Is it going to replace the need for SSL altogether? Because again, IPv6 includes some of those basic things that were built into the structure of SSL into the actual IPv6 environment. So the keying, all that other stuff, is that important? Is that something that's going to be in play in the near future? And again, beyond that, if that IPv6 isn't the answer, well, what new offerings are going to emerge to replace that are going to utilize IPv6 as the new structure? But what else is there? Who's going to be that company that's going to come out with something that's going to secure that channel beyond just what IPv6 has available? So again, you know, why do you care? Quite honestly, I mean, my big thing here is our customers really do care about this. Our customers are concerned about this. I mean, they have an internet presence that they need to secure for varying channels, either be it financial or any of those other types of connections. So again, they do care about it, and their decisions that they're going to make today are going to affect our direction as a company in the future. So again, you know, what is it that you want to do? How do you want to handle this? And the question is, well, what else is there? What are they thinking with regards to these kinds of things? And again, you know, in 2015, this is the polling question here. In 2015, what will be the dominant encryption method? And again, is it something new? Is it SSL? Do we think in 2015 SSL is still going to be there? Do we think that TLS is going to replace that particular operation? I think it will at some point, some form of TLS. And then the next question is, if IPv6 is the answer, why is it not, you know, been widely adopted as being that particular solution? And then additionally, is there something new? Is there something new that's going to fall out of this kind of discussion and this kind of way of ensuring SSL's future in ensuring that the security at the internet level is going to happen? So again, this is good, interesting polling data that I'm seeing here. You know, a lot of folks are believing that TLS is going to have a play. I think, you know, there's a few folks that are considering SSL and IPv6 as being the answer. Again, I think it's going to be something different. I think it's going to be something new. That's my personal polling opinion. Just to kind of let you know, I think it's going to be a sort of mismatch of both of those. I think TLS will have a play in that particular structure within IPv6. I also, unfortunately, feel that IPv6, I wish, was moving ahead a whole lot faster, but I believe the adoption here in the U.S. is a little slow. So, all right. So
So Paul?
Yes, sir.
As we go in and look at this and you know, think about this, does IPv6 give us some of that encryption? I mean, or is it just a different addressing scheme? I thought it was just different addressing. I didn't know there was any security associated with it.
There is some security. So there is the concept of message authentication codes for message integrity to ensure that the data contained within that hasn't been modified in its actual traversing back and forth. There's also some encryption algorithms that are being built into IPv6 that are part of the encapsulation. So again, there's a couple of things that are going to help with it. The question is, can we leverage what IPv6 is currently offering as the answer to replace this? In other words, is there a, you know, when you communicate back and forth between two servers in this case, or two devices in this case, you're utilizing IP addressing information. In the IPv6 model, you have the ability to enable something else. You have the ability to enable that sort of secure channel. That I'm creating a secure channel between myself and that other entity based on the fact that IPv6 does carry some kind of certificate type information that is going to clearly identify that server at the other end and how that data is going to be contained in that channel. So the question, you know, kind of begs of, okay, well, there's sort of some things that SSL and TLS are doing that are in IPv6. It's not currently implemented at the rate at which other people feel this is important. But again, I think there's a lot of folks out there that are really thinking that IPv6 potentially could replace that for standard communication and or standard secure information. However, there's obviously going to be a need for something additional for the more secure connections that people are looking for. So for example, I can open up an IPv6 channel between you and a particular vendor, for example, when I'm going online and I'm browsing for a purchase. But then I start to fall down that road of, okay, if that's the case, and now I want to present my credentials, I want to present some information such as a credit card, I'm purchasing something online, do I want that credential to be encrypted and message integrity and all that other information that's inside of that IPv6 channel? Is that kind of the thing that I am okay with in sending across that kind of technology information? And I think there's going to be a big change there where people are going to say, IPv6 kind of gets me there, but quite honestly, when it comes to credit card information and other things that are traversing the internet and between sites, I think there is going to be a need for something else added to that, some kind of adoption of a secure channel inside of a channel. I know that sounds kind of strange, but it is kind of the idea of what we're talking about here. It is outside of just the transport layer. There needs to be something else in there, again, potentially at the application layer that's going to encrypt that channel going back and forth so that the data I'm passing is going to be important. So again, we talked a little bit about you know, what kind of things we're talking here. Weak implementation, I think that's the biggest, you know, knock that SSL currently has in the environments. You know, as Clayton alluded to, the fact that there's a possibility that, you know, some folks really got into the idea that things are causing problems, so they started to go down this weak implementation side, and it was causing errors, it's causing issues. So, you know, there's obviously a need to either improve it, not necessarily change it at the current time. People do believe out there that IPv6 may change the world going forward and eliminate the need for some of the SSL channels that are being utilized. I think there's also going to be some additional changes needed to secure a particular channel, in fact, if there is going to be secure information over and above IPv6 and what that's going to bring to the table. One of the things that concerns me the most is IPv6 adoption. Quite honestly, here in North America, it is extremely slow. A lot of folks, there's a lot of changes. There's a note here in one of the what do you think sections here that talks about, since it requires new hardware, it may take a while to become widespread at a consumer level, and that is absolutely the case. it is going to require some wholesale changes in the way we do things from a hardware perspective, from a software perspective, a lot of other things that are coming into play because you're looking at IP addressing much differently than you did before. So is it slow here? Yeah, it's kind of slow here. Elsewhere outside of the U.S., you guys would be able to tell me I'm hearing reports from countries like New Zealand and Australia and countries like that who have a very limited amount of available IP addresses, and because of the amount of IP addresses that they have available, that they're running out of them quickly, and the need for something else to help improve that IP addressing solution and ensuring that devices are getting identified properly and being allowed onto the internet, they're moving at that rate a whole lot faster than we are. I think also in Asia that same situation is happening. However, I'd be interested in some of the data that you see here. What do you think? If you have some data on that, or you have some background from one of those other countries or things like that, that would be fantastic as well. My challenge to you is to become the trusted advisor, to sit down with customers and talk about these kinds of things. Where are you going? What are the changes? And start the conversation with customers. Again, a really great way to start that specifically is to sit down with them and say, what about your SSL environment? What about what about that kind of thing? And even take it a step further and say, as it relates specifically to the proliferation of mobile devices, right? Because that's really where a lot of the problems are beginning to become reality in those countries like New Zealand and Australia, where they had a limited number of IP addresses based on what was assigned to them at the original processing. You start to think about it and go, okay, well, now I need to have more because every single device has an IP address and everything needs to have that. So start that conversation. What about iOS devices, for example, and how that relates to things? Again, iOS devices, they recall and store certificates and CAs in a different manner in which those mobile devices are out there. Right? They're not utilizing the standard CAPI stores that Microsoft used for years. So when we were only talking specifically about desktops, it was an easy conversation. But now you start to get into a much deeper conversation when you talk about mobile devices and how those certificates are stored and how that exchange is going to happen. And again, I'm not asking folks on the phone, and I'm not saying you need to get up on this stuff and really understand it. However, it's good conversation starters. This is the kind of thing that builds what's called the consultative approach, the trusted advisor kind of thing. Having a conversation with your customer, not specifically around, I'm trying to sell you a product. I'm having an open conversation with you specifically around what are your plans for securing your currently used SSL channels within the next 3 to 5 years. And then bring up the idea of Ipv6 and how that's going to be. What are their plans for that? What are their plans for the future for that? When do they see that becoming part of their world? Begin those conversations to begin that sort of process of bringing that into what you're looking at. And again, that's really important to get that consultative approach and become that trusted advisor. Again, it's a great conversation starter.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, this is great stuff. I wish we had another 20 minutes. But,
right, exactly.
I think one of the things that we probably ought to do is as you move to the next slide and we can go ahead and rate this, everybody that's online, go ahead and notice his, how his contact information is there, and so you can call him and talk to him and, and really think about this, and, and if you have questions as you're moving forward, contact him directly and do that so that we can, because I think there's a lot to discuss, and we can ask questions and then all of a sudden we get answers that we don't know what it means, and so everybody, if you look at that, and so Paul, if you move to that next slide, and then you can close and
absolutely.
Any closing comments you've got?
Sure. So to kind of address the previous, there were some questions in there, and just really quickly, CA does have on their roadmap support for IPv6 and new products. I can tell you that nearly all of them have had this added in conversations that I've had with Tom Hamilton. That is an important part of what we're doing specifically in the security space and across all the other platforms and across all the other BUs. It is being brought to the attention of folks to start to go down this road, to begin to look at those kind of things and start being ready for it. Again, we're the sort of, again, this is what I wanted to say about this session overall, is to just basically say to folks, where are we going? What are we looking at? Get educated, have a conversation with customers, get their feedback so that you can actually have these kind of conversations. And I, for one, am not an expert in SSL. I understood it. I went off and did a little research. I sat down and looked at a few things to create this quick presentation. But if you think about it, a lot of the things that I'm saying here are just general conversation points that I think you can use to have conversations with your customers, to sit down and say, what about this Ipv6 thing? Do you think that's going to be it? What about securing your internal channels? Do you think that's going to be the answer? What else are you planning on employing on top of that? Having those kinds of conversations with customers gets you into that technical conversation of potentially being that trusted advisor for them and having secure discussions that are not necessarily there to just sell them something. Although that is the goal of things, it is a good approach to deliver with them conversations that help bring out data that you can discuss with them on. So again, thank you for your time. I appreciate this, and hopefully you got something out of the session overall. Again, my contact information is at the bottom here on the slide. I thank you for your time, and that's it for me.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it. Learned a lot, and there's a lot of good stuff and a lot more to think about as we go forward. And certainly appreciate people being here and participating. Next week, on the 4th of March, it'll be V-Block, which I call the ultimate black box. I have no idea what's going on in there and what's going to be there. And so join us next week at the same time, and we'll be talking about V-Block and how it works, and that'll give us some real helpful information about what we can do with that and what that means to our customers moving forward. So until then, we appreciate you being here, and good selling.